Imagine your boss coming to you for a performance review. She says, "Good job. You're doing well. I appreciate your hard work. Now get out there and keep on doing it. And oh, by the way, we're cutting your pay by 50%. My question is, when do you start looking for another job? Tomorrow or immediately? America's real estate agents woke up Friday morning to the news that hit them just like that. On Friday, March the 15th, 2024, we learned the National Association of Realtors, or NAR, had settled several lawsuits for $418 million. In just a minute, I'm going to tell you what it means to you both as a consumer and for those of you who are real estate investors. What I'm going to say today may initially sound like a contradiction, so I like to preface my comments with some clarification. I believe that all people are a mixture of good and evil. We generally characterize a person by the behavior we see or choose to ignore. When we say he's a good man, we mean that in a general sense. We don't mean he's morally perfect. We just see more good in him than bad. Since all organizations are made up of people, we can use the same type of generalizations. But since there are multiple people involved with differing influences over time, it gets considerably more complicated. Now, having said that, I believe the National Association of Realtors is a good organization that I don't completely trust. Let me explain. If I were a real estate agent, I would join NAR. Why? Because they hold agents to the highest ethical and professional standards. The NAR endorsement, which allows agents to be known as realtors, is a strong credibility statement. But I don't fully trust NAR for the same reason I don't trust labor unions. Professional organizations rightfully advocate for the benefits of the dues-paying members. But sometimes they do so at the expense of outsiders, usually the consumer. Like every organization on this earth, including churches, mosques, synagogues, hospitals, and schools, there is a mixture of good, not so good, and downright evil. Now, we're not going to figure all of that out on this episode today. And besides, I'm not the judge of all of creation anyway. I'm only saying this to point out that my views are not contradictory, but rather nuanced. I think NAR has done some good. And I think NAR has made some decisions that make life difficult for well-meaning agents. I think NAR has perhaps unwittingly, or maybe knowingly, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here, cost consumers money in favor of its realtors. Now, what I'm going to do over the next few minutes, I'm going to give you the details of the settlement to try to put it into as plain English as I can, because there's a lot of conversation about it, but the conversation is either technical or I've seen dumbed down so much that you don't really get the sense of what's going on. I'm going to try to strike that happy middle ground here in the next few minutes. And then I'm going to talk about what all of this really means, what the end result is going to be. So hang with me for a couple minutes. Here are the settlement details. The settlement is for all of the current cases, and it releases NAR from the previous jury decision. Now, just about 6 or 7 shows ago, I discussed the NAR lawsuit and a little bit, probably 10 minutes of the show, so more than a little bit, but we talked about it for a while, and we talked about the Spitzer decision and the other cases that were out there. They were looking at something in the neighborhood of $240 billion in lawsuits. They settled all of it for $418 million, and this also moved them out of the case that the Spitzer case that they lost earlier, set aside that in favor of this settlement. They're going to pay the $418 million into a trust fund over the next 4 years. And I'll just tell you right now, the only people that are getting rich off this are the lawyers. The actual members of the class, however many that turns out to be, they're going to divide that between them after the $100 million in legal fees, but it's going to be divided among a lot of people. So it remains to be seen what the benefit will be to the actual class. The settlement bans NAR from establishing any sort of rules that would allow a seller's agent to set compensation for a buyer's agent. Okay? This is kind of it's sort of been presumptively assumed for many years. Now, the fact is, anyone can negotiate the commission that you want to pay, but most people don't know that. And, let's be fair. Agents are not going to volunteer that sort of information most of the time. They're not going to sit there and say, well, I work for 6%, but you could probably get me for 4. They're not going to do that. They're going to go with what we call the presumptive close, and it's just been accepted as standard for quite some time. However, you have been able to negotiate this always. So that part doesn't really change. The difference is the seller's agent is no longer going to set the compensation for the buyer's agent. That is going to have to be negotiated separately. And I'll get into more of that in just a minute. All right. All fields displaying broker compensation on the MLSs, the multiple listing services, must be eliminated. And there is a blanket ban on the requirement that agents subscribe to the MLSs in the first place in order to make an offer or to accept compensation for their work. That is a move in favor of freedom, and anything that moves in favor of freedom, I'm generally for. MLS participants working with buyers must enter into a buyer-broker agreement. Now, this is a whole area of discussion on its own that, it's probably not going to be of much interest to the general public, but buyer-broker agreements can sometimes really take advantage of the buyers. That's all we'll say about that. So just be careful. But you're going to have to if you're a buyer and you want an agent, you're going to have to sign a buyer-broker agreement. Now, NAR said that these changes will go into effect by mid-July of 2024. And it's mid-March as I say all this right now. Buyer brokers will still have a variety of ways to be compensated, including a fixed fee or commission paid directly by the buyer, concessions from the home seller, or a portion of the listing broker's compensation. They've got several ways that they can work this out. And commission co-ops are still permitted as long as an agreement on that is reached outside of the MLS. So, you can guess what's going to happen. They're going to reach an agreement outside the MLS, and they're even going to have forms for it. Agents can no longer be forced to belong to their local MLS in order to work and get paid. I mentioned that already, and I'm in favor of that. That really is a summary of the basics of the agreement. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about my thoughts, and some of this, as I said, I've already shared, but repetition won't hurt because there may be 2 or 3 of you that didn't hear the last show where I talked about this. In general, I've already mentioned this, I tend to distrust trade organizations and labor unions alike. They unify around protecting their own members, often at the expense of the consumer. I see some elements of that in NAR practices that have resulted in the lawsuits. Now, remember, I said that after saying if I were a real estate agent, I would join NAR to become a realtor. And by the way, in case you're wondering about that, you can only be called a realtor if you're a member of the National Association of Realtors. If you're not a member of NAR, but you have a license to sell real estate, then you are a real estate agent. So all realtors are agents, but not all agents are realtors. Keep that in mind. Okay, now I think it's a good thing that agents will no longer be required to join the MLS. This is a check mark in the freedom column. At the same time, I believe the home buying process is the most complex business arrangement the vast majority of Americans will ever participate in. And they are woefully unprepared to do it without some type of representation. People are going to get hurt. The answer is not going to lie in educating the American public. We should make this knowledge available for the motivated consumers, but for most, it just isn't going to work. A lot of people don't want to learn this stuff or don't have time to learn this stuff. They don't want to know all the details. They just want to buy a house. And some people would rather kind of sit there blindly, and if something goes wrong, just claim victimhood. Somebody will feel sorry for you. Someone will publish something in the paper, and uninformed people will take your side without bothering to know that it's really your own fault. Anyway, the last thing, I want to be careful about this because, well, I am a nice person. My wife thinks so anyway, and I don't want to be perceived otherwise. But some people are just not going to be able to get it. This is a complicated business transaction, and it's not the most complicated, but it's the most complicated that a lot of people will see in their lifetime. And there are some people who just are not going to understand. Even even savvy people don't understand how things go in one column or the other on the settlement statement, particularly around how the earnest money is credited and debited. And all of that can be really confusing, and some people are just not going to get it. In other words, they're a couple of French fries short of a Happy Meal. I take some comfort as I walk down the street or drive home from the office and I see people just doing idiotic things, either on the road or people walking down the street. I just take some comfort in this knowledge. As you go through life, half of all the people you meet are going to be dumber than average. Sounds cruel to say, but it's also kind of funny. And the point of it is, should we restrict home ownership only to the people who are smarter than average? No, we shouldn't. You can be dumber than average and own a home. Okay. You can be at a point where you just don't understand all of this stuff. But if you have an agent that you trust, an agent acting on your behalf who is conforming to ethical standards and guidelines, you can have some assurance that you're going to be okay. Short of that, you better understand it. You better know it, because there are wolves out there ready to take advantage of you. Now, I read this morning that the Consumer Federation of America predicts that commissions are going to fall 3 to 4%. I'm going to look you in the eye right now and tell you it is not going to happen. You tell an agent that they're going to have to work for half of their pay, they're not going to do it. Okay. This is something that, I have heard all kinds of people complain about, real estate agents don't really do anything. They just list the house. Everything's available on the internet now. Well, look, the knowledge about the house and the listing of the house and the marketing of the house is a tiny, minuscule part of what a real estate agent actually does. And most people don't know this. If you're an agent, you have to work under a broker. And when you get paid, you have to give your broker a nice chunk of what you make. Sometimes it's 60-40 in your favor. Sometimes it's 20-80 in your favor. But the industry average is 60-40. So in other words, if you're an agent, when your agent gets paid, I'm going to go through a specific example in a minute. That money is going to be split 4 ways, because each agent has a broker that they've got to give some of their money to. That's just the way it is. Now, agents will make what they need, or they're going to go do something else. They are not going to settle for a 1% commission. Why should they take on all of the liability and the professional responsibility and the effort and the marketing and the wasted time showing people multiple houses who end up going and finding one on the internet and bringing in their cousin who is a part-time agent to be why would they put up with all of that stuff to make what they could be making waiting tables in a luxury restaurant? They're not going to do it, okay? It's not. All right. Now, here's a specific example. I looked this up just for this episode. The average cost of a home in America today is $417,000. 6% of that is $25,000. You're thinking, man, that agent is making a $25,000 commission. No, they are not. There are 2 agents involved. Each one is getting a check for $12,010. Then they're going to go back and split that with their broker. Let's say the 60-40 split, which is a pretty generous split. So they're going to go home with $7,200. Now, I tried to find the average number of homes that agents sell in the U.S., and the best I could get before we had to start recording this was the average agent sells 2 to 10 houses a year. That's a pretty wide range. But that means the average agent is going to make between $14,400 to $72,000 a year. And $72,000 a year sounds like an awful lot, but well, to some people. But you think about it, and they have these additional costs. They have to maintain their license. They have to pay, in addition to splitting their money with the broker, they usually have to pay a broker's desk fee just to have an office. They have to have memberships. They have to spend money in marketing. Who do you think pays for those signs that are out there in the yard? And they have to pay to, their memberships include like joining their local MLS, which up until now has been required. They have to take continuing education. They have to buy various types of insurance to protect themselves. And they have all of these expenses related to running their business, which is real estate representation. They're representing buyers or sellers in this transaction. And they only get paid when they sell a property. You think agents don't earn their money? And I've heard this so many times. Every time I hear it, I just, well, I'm not an argumentative person really, but the argument, the little argument part in my brain somewhere says, we need to really talk about this. Okay. If you think agents don't earn their money, you just try to sell your house yourself. All right. You try to get it in front of a lot of people. You got to be pretty much on the MLS to do that. If you list it on the MLS now, that automatically populates a whole bunch of other sites. If you go out there and figure out how to put your house on Zillow, that doesn't mean it's going anywhere else. Okay? Not automatically. So you figure that out. Then you manage to develop and complete a legally binding purchase and sale agreement. Then you navigate all of the contract to close issues, such as contingencies for financing, for inspection, handle the inspection related repair requests, and help with other lender conditions and get this thing to the closing table, which, by the way, is where I think most agents really earn their money. That's between the time it goes from contract to the closing table. All right. Then you've got to go find a settlement agent. In some states, it's an attorney. In other states, it's a title company. And how do you know? Well, you just research it. You're going to do this yourself, right? Then you need to read and understand the settlement statement and all the disclosure documents. You need to know the laws regarding mold, radon, other hazardous substance, rights of way that may be crossing the property, mining rights in some states, water inspection, termite inspection, and there's probably a dozen other issues that bring potential liability to you if you don't handle it correctly. Now, some people out there can and will do this and will be fine. Many will attempt and fail. Most don't even want to try. That's just the reality of the situation. Let's do a little mental exercise, and we've done this around the office today to practice a little bit. I think this is going to bring home what I'm trying to say. Let's say that you are a first-time home buyer, okay? You're using an FHA loan. Like most first-time home buyers, you haven't saved up a lot of money, and I have my opinions about that, but this is not the place, okay? We got the FHA program here. You can do this for a 3% down payment, but you don't have a whole lot of other money. You certainly don't have the cash to pay a buyer broker their $25,000 or their $12,000 at closing. You don't have that money. So you get a broker who agrees, or sometimes they will just choose, to only show you houses where the seller is offering to pay the buyer broker. Okay, that's all right. That doesn't break any laws. It may violate someone's sense of ethical obligations, but things are different now, okay? And if the buyer broker wants to get paid, they need to make sure somehow they're going to get paid. And if their client can't pay them, they need to make sure the other side's going to pay them, right? So that's what they're going to look for, and that's what they're going to show. And I don't blame them. All right. Now, sellers of first-time home buyer houses, those types of houses, are going to quickly learn that if they're going to get their house shown and sold, they're just going to have to agree to pay the buyer's broker. If they want it to go, then they're just going to pay both sides, like they've always done. Well, how are we going to cover that? Well, we'll just raise the price. We'll get the highest price that we possibly can. So the net effect, no change from the current status, except everyone had the illusion of more choices, but really it's going to be the same. Now, let's take another example. Let's say you have a more sophisticated seller who says, I want to sell my house, but I just need an agent to put it on the MLS. I don't need to pay a full commission. I can handle a lot of this stuff myself. Some people are going to do this just fine. They will do the research and dig in and know the details, and they'll find a good buyer who is not going to argue, and they can actually really afford the place, and it's going to go smoothly. And those people will be loudly proclaiming, this is what everyone should do. The problem is not everyone, in fact, most people are not going to be motivated enough or smart enough to figure it all out. And they're not maybe going to connect with the best buyers. Some buyers come with a bucket of problems. Take it from someone who has bought and sold over 2,000 houses. Some buyers come with a bucket of problems. And sometimes we want to solve those problems, and sometimes we want to help them solve those problems, and sometimes we just end up telling them to go away because their problems are just it's not going to work. All right. Now, some people are going to get hosed by more sophisticated scamsters. Is that still a thing? Can we still say that? I don't know what the proper thing, what the current vernacular is, but they're going to be taken advantage of by more sophisticated scamsters. It's going to happen. People are going to try to sell their house themselves, and they're going to hurt. And I hate to see it. I hate to even think about that. It's the price of freedom. Now, many are going to get into this process. I think this is where most people lie. They'll say, I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to sell the house myself. Then they get into the process and they see the complexity involved, and then they're going to want to hire a broker. And guess what? That broker is not going to volunteer for a 50% pay cut. The broker's going to get paid what they're used to getting paid. I believe the net effect here is little to no change from where we are now. One more scenario. You're going to see a rise for a little while in discount brokerage. Now, brokerages, but these have always been around. Well, they have for at least the last 10 years. Flat fee brokerages, low commissions, discounted stuff. I know that there are brokerages operating in the Midwestern U.S., and I assume they're everywhere else as well, that will list your house for a 2% commission. You'll get a sign in the yard. You'll get on the local MLS. The end, my friend. They're not going to take phone calls. They're not going to arrange showings. It's up to you to show the house. It's up to you to really work the contract to close process. It's up to you to just handle everything from that point. And some of them don't have telephone support. And I found one that doesn't even have a telephone. If you have a question, you have to email it to them, and they promise to get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. Every real estate contract says time is of the essence, but I don't think 24 to 48 hours for an email response is what they have in mind. It's a get what you pay for world. If you want to be one of these brokerages, prepare to deal with a different collection of difficulties. And the same is true if you want to hire one of these brokerages. It's going to be different. It's not going to be standardized for a while, and there are going to be problems. Now, here's the other thing. If you're a discount brokerage house, do you think you have a chance of hiring the best agents who are effective and really good at this? I don't think so. Why would they come work for you and take half the pay when they're good enough to earn their keep at a full service brokerage? That's where they're going to go. So that means that the good agents are going to be with the full service brokerages. And I'm not going to say bad agents, but who's left? They're going to be at the discount brokerages. That's going to lead to bad reviews. That's going to create a vicious cycle, taking your listing off of Yelp because you're getting like 1.5 to 2 stars. Most discount brokerages that fire up over the next couple of years will be out of business in 4 years. The net effect is no real difference, except for the people who invested in the seed funding round of these new brokerages. I guess what I'm trying to say is all this has been tried before. There is a company out there called Compass. And look, this is going to sound critical of Compass. I don't mean it that way, and I'm not even the type of guy that just wants to call people out. But what I'm about to say to you are the actual facts of the situation. Compass, originally called Urban Compass, founded in 2012. Their vision was to revolutionize the world of home buying by creating an online platform that would remove the need for buyer and seller agents. Since 2012, Compass has raised $1.5 billion in 10 different rounds. Add to that, they right now are also $500 million in debt. So $2 billion has been thrown at this. By 2019, they realized that their model had utterly failed. People do not want to do this transaction without representation. So they pivoted and they opened brokerages all over the country. See, when I said Compass, a lot of you said, oh yeah, I've heard of Compass. Yeah, they're a brokerage. They weren't always brokerages, and they didn't intend to be. They didn't form to be that. They pivoted and started that in 2019. Here's an interesting thing, and I checked on this just today to make sure. This company has never been profitable. I don't know. You know, I'm not ignorant, and I do read the financial news and I stay on top of this, but I don't understand how a company can raise that much money over 10 years and not turn a profit and not have people pounding at the door saying, "Where's my money?" I also read that the CEO is worth $31 million. That's $31 million of other people's money that has been put into a company that's never made a dime. I don't get it. In some sense, I would love to be, in a company that could do that, but I don't know if I could with a clear conscience. Oh, well, maybe Compass will turn around and be a profitable brokerage one of these days. I'm for you. You go, guys, gals, ladies, whatever the politically correct term is. In conclusion, I certainly agree. There is almost always room for improvement in the way we conduct our lives and businesses. I tend to think that, in general, business and economic practices have evolved over dozens, hundreds of years in favor of efficiency, profitability, and consumer effectiveness. And the consumers let us know what works. They vote with their pocketbooks. Ultimately, freedom comes at an ongoing price, and that price is individual responsibility. We each have the responsibility to educate ourselves as adults to function in this world. My own kids call it adulting. Okay, whatever it is called in the future, at some point you transition from being a child dependent on your parents and looking outside of you for everything. And at some point you start to figure things out for yourself. Okay. So you become an adult to function in this world. You learn how to move wisely and avoid getting ripped off. What I've noticed through my adult life and career is when there are attempts to inject victimhood or to help grown adults avoid responsibility or simply change a well-established system simply because someone somewhere thinks someone might be getting treated unfairly, this is going to receive favorable treatment in the press, and everyone's rooting for the regular guy and the underdog or life's lottery losers, and we want to see everyone do well. This sentiment is played like a symphony orchestra by class action lawyers who see the opportunity to get rich, and they're the only ones making money in this whole deal. At the end of all of this, NAR might be forced into doing some things that will seem to help the less fortunate, but I think the only people who will have a harder time due to this are the less fortunate. First-time home buyers, unsophisticated buyers, people who want to own a home but don't want to be bothered with the actual process of buying, they're going to have a harder time in the immediate future. I don't think that's the result that they were looking for when they filed the suit, at least the ideologues that are involved in this. In the longer term, things will end up being a lot like they are right now. You can try to negotiate a different commission if you want, but most won't. If you enjoyed this content and if you got something out of it, please do me a favor and subscribe to the platform, share it with somebody else wherever you are. We're going to end up the show today with the quote of the day. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. This thought from C.S. Lewis. That's it for today, my friends. You know what I always say at the end of every episode? Keep your eyes open.